The Stalinist repressions in Mongolia had their climax between 1937 and 1939, under the leadership of Khorloogiin Choibalsan by Russian instructions. The purge was to destroy Mongolian patriotic influence and because Russia wanted to stop the Buryats' migration to the Mongolian People's Republic. In 1930, all leaders of Mongolia who did not recognize Russian demands to perform purges against Mongolians were executed by the Russians, including Peljidiin, Genden and Anandyn. Amar.Choibalsan recognized the demand due to the Soviet threat. In 1952, he suspiciously died in Russia. Comintern leader Bohumir Smeril said, "The people of Mongolia are not important. The land is important. Mongolia is larger than England, France and Germany." The purges affected the whole country, although the main focus was on upper party and government ranks, the army, the Buryat ethnic group, patriots, nobles, nationalists, intellectuals, the wealthy and especially the Buddhist clergy. One very common accusation was collaboration with supposed pro-Japanese spirings. Tens of thousands were killed in the purges. Historian Hiroki Kuromiya notes that 20,474 people were said to have been executed at the time of the Mongolian Great Terror, about 3% of the country's population. History. After the revolution, the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party committed itself to socialist transformation, following the instructions received from the Soviet Union. In 1926 in the MPR, the law on the separation of church and state, which noted that our government is sympathetic to religion, bless communes, so it is within the law firm defends business compliance, study and dissemination of the teachings, but abolished the privileges the higher ranks of the Buddhist clergy, Bilganov and Hambo, and ordered each time for finding of a new rebirth to petition the government. Soon after, the MPRP and Revzimor led an active struggle for secularization at the end of the 1920s as the country, almost simultaneously with the Soviet Union, began collectivization. It was the confiscation of property from the clergy and the old feudal nobility. In 1930, Teiji Zarugdandaji wrote a letter to the Panchen Lama IX with a request to settle in the country of Juvenal Bogd Gegan IX as a monarch, destroying the MPRP and stopping the secularization of the clergy with the assistance of the troops of the Chinese Republic. One of the princes which he showed this treatment informed on him. According to the Khorloogiin, those involved included Kyud Manjushri Kutukta and others allegedly supported the plan. As a result of the investigation on the 30th of September, 8 people were shot, led by Gal Sandasham. By the beginning of 1930, about 10,000 monks have been expelled from monasteries. These processes and reforms displeased not only the well-off Buryat noyons and clergy, but for all the residents of Mongolia, which resulted in 1932 in the Chovsgal uprising, which was suppressed in only 6 months. Leaders of the uprising were put on public trial and were sentenced to death. During 1933–1934, in the Khorloogiin were repressed 317 people, Chentage Group 174 people, Dornod Group 110 people, Ulaanbaatar Group 33 person. Most of the victims were from the northern Buryats, Amags, Dornod, Chentage, and Ulaanbaatar. In addition to the prison sentences of 5 to 10 years, additional form of punishment was expulsion to the Soviet Union, followed by 5 years of imprisonment in the camps without the right to return to Mongolia. 1936 to 1939. On the 22nd of March 1936, at the plenum of the Central Committee of the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party, Khorloogiin Choibalsan Stalin, with the support of Joseph Stalin, ousted chairman of People's Commissars of the Mongolian People's Republic, Peljidiin Genden, who opposed the deployment of Soviet troops in the country and the start of the country's large-scale repression of the clergy using the Soviet example. In April 1936, Mongolia started the trial of Llamas who were accused of raising the prestige of religion, which was seen as counter-revolutionary, and of spying for Japan. The next process in October 1936, the defendants were accused of using Japanese help in planning an armed uprising and restoring the feudal system. Of the 17 defendants, 6 were sentenced to death and the others to various terms of imprisonment. During 1936 there were 5 public trials of the Buddhist clergy. In 1937, Choibalsan sent several letters to the NKVD leader Nikolai Yezhov on the results of trials of Llamas. In them, he thanked Yezhov for sending to Mongolia Mikhail Frenovsky, one of the organizers of the Great Purge in the Soviet Union. Choibalsan also pointed to the involvement of the Llamas in counter-revolutionary activities and that he carried out tips of Comrade Stalin, which are 5 show trials of top Llamas on charges of treason, espionage and preparation of armed uprising. These processes are strongly compromised higher Llamas. In May of that year, Choibalsan sent a letter report to Yezhov, which cited the testimony of detainees and indicated Genden as a Japanese spy. In July 1937, Genden, who lived with his family in the Crimea in the rest home Forest, was arrested by the NKVD. NKVD fabricated a case where he allegedly operated in Mongolia, Soviet Buryat pan-Mongolist and pro-Japanese espionage organization, linked through the Soviet ambassador in Mongolia B.H. Terov and military conspirators in the Red Army led by Mikhail Tukhachevsky. On 1 September, Secretary of the Buryat Mongolian Regional Committee of the All-Union Communist Party Amar Banov was arrested on the case. On 27 August, Soviet troops were introduced to Mongolia. On 30 August, Deputy People's Commissar of Internal Affairs of the USSR Mikhail Frenovsky handed Choibalsan a copy of Genden readings and a list of 115 conspirators. On 10 September in Mongolia, mass arrests began. On 19 September 1937, the Politburo of the All-Union Communist Party decided to accept the offer to Frenovsky about organizing a special troika composed of Choibalsan, Minister of Justice and the Secretary of the MPRP Central Committee to hear cases on the Mongolian Llamas. On 4 October 1937, a public hearing was held against the major figures of the clergy, including the abbot of Gandan Monastery in Ulaanbaatar and High Lamas, Tibetan Enzon Kambo Ts. Lobsang Heimchig and Dead Kambo B. Damdin, members of the Central Counter-Revolutionary Group. They were accused of spying in favor of the Panchen Lama IX and participation in all former counter-revolutionary conspiracies. Of the 23 defendants, 19 were sentenced to shooting, including High Lamas Ts. Lobsang Heimchig, B. Damdin and Manjushrik Utuktu Zerandorj. From 18 to 21 October 1937 at the State Theatre in Ulaanbaatar, a public demonstration was held against the former Zamglavkoma MNRA Atshava Lama, a former Second Zamsovna Koma Gonchig Sambu, a former Nashjenshtaba MNRA Jigdala Malget, the prosecutor of the Republic M.D. Idam Shuran, former Minister of Education, and the other members of the counter-revolutionary organization of Genden and Demad. Of the 14 defendants, 13 were shot. Within few months in 1937, 16 ministers and the deputies, 40 22 generals and senior officers. 44 senior officials of the state and economic apparatus were arrested. On 20 October 1937, an emergency commission was created, headed by Choibalsan, to deal with cases of extrajudicial prisoners. Shortly thereafter, in the Mongolian People's Republic, there began mass repression against the clergy, including the destruction of Mongolian monasteries and the shootings of Llamas. In 1938, Gandan Monastery declared the law. In 1926, the center of the Buddhist faith in Mongolia was closed. During the time, the largest Buddhist statue, Megjit Arisek, disappeared. Of the more than 800 monasteries in the vast majority of the country was destroyed. Llamas were almost completely eliminated. Repression touched many members of the Mongolian intelligentsia, declared enemies of the people, who were accused of reactionary propaganda and sabotage activities in the field of science and education. To the USSR were sent people suspected of pan-Mongolist activities. Standard followed in the case of the German spies, cause of Japanese spies. Port Arthur case were accused of espionage, subversion, sabotage and subversive activities, the preparation of attacks on the leadership of the MPRP and the overthrow of the people's government. The repression also touched on members of national minorities. The Chinese were accused of spying for the regime of Chiang Kai-shek, and the Buryats accused of pan-Mongolist conspirators and as Japanese agents. After the removal of Genden as the head of government in 1936, Anandyn Amar was arrested in 1939 and his 28 closest associates. All of them were taken to the Soviet Union in July 1941 and were shot by the sentence of the military collegium of the Supreme Court of the USSR on the site Kommunarka. Mass repressions continued until April 1939. Repression of the Buddhist establishment increased in December 1934, when Mongolian law was amended to ban religious teaching in schools, prevent children from entering monasteries, and ending the mass evasion of military service. Heavy taxes were also imposed on the monasteries. In the mid-1930s, before the Great Purge, there were some 800 Buddhist monasteries in Mongolia with 90,000 priests. In 1937 and 1938, most of the monasteries were ruined and between 16,000 and 17,000 priests were killed. According to one estimate, by 1939 the purges had killed 27,000 Mongolians, about 3% of the population. About half the victims were monks. During the Stalinist repressions, Mongolia's religious institutions were virtually all destroyed, the property appropriated, and the Llamas either killed or secularized. Altogether, 2,265 monastery buildings were destroyed and over 71.5 tons of metal statues shipped to the USSR for scrap. The Gandan Monastery in Ulaanbaatar was closed in 1938 at the height of the purges but reopened in 1944. It was the only monastery in Mongolia to remain functioning during the communist era, and one of the very few that escaped destruction. The number of people killed in the purges is usually estimated to have been between 22,000 and 35,000 people, or about 3 to 4% of Mongolia's population at the time. Nearly 18,000 victims were Buddhist Llamas. Some authors also offer much higher estimates, up to 100,000 victims. Mass graves were investigated in 1991 in Moron, and in 2003 in Ulaanbaatar. The corpses of hundreds of executed Llamas and civilians were unearthed, all killed with a shot to the base of the skull. The Victims of Political Persecution Museum in Ulaanbaatar is dedicated to the victims of the purges. It was once the residence of executed Prime Minister Peljidiin Genden. In 1996 his daughter Sarinjalam turned it into a museum. One of the exhibits is a row of skulls with bullet holes dating from the time of the purges. The number of victims. The total number of people killed during the repression is estimated to be 22,000 to 33,000 people, which is about 3% to 5% of the population. Around the late 1930s, the Mongolian People's Republic had a population of about 700,000 to 900,000 people. Only from August 1937 to January 1938, according to the Soviet embassy in Mongolia, 10,728 people have been arrested, including 7,814 Llamas, 322 Noyans, 180 army commanders and 408 Chinese. During this period, cases were heard on 7,171 people, of whom 6,311 were executed. According to these data, the brunt of the repression was inflicted on Buddhist monasticism. Between 1936 and 1939, two-thirds of the members of the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party were repressed. 8 out of 10 members of the Presidium of the Central Committee pooled data for the same period of the Extraordinary Commission, headed by Choibalsan under the close supervision of advisors of the USSR, condemned 25,588 people, of whom 20,099 were sentenced to death and executed. Proportion of victims in relation to the population of the country is much higher than the corresponding figures of the Great Purge in the Soviet Union. Afterwards, 29,000 people were rehabilitated. Notable victims: Peljidiin Genden, Prime Minister of Mongolia from 1932 to 1936. Anandyn Amar, Prime Minister of Mongolia from 1936 to 1939. Darazov and Losol, Jelegd Orgian Demad, Buryats. A number of prominent Buryats connected to Mongolia were imprisoned and killed during the purges in the Soviet Union, among them, Zhevin Jamsrano, Rinching Yan Elbagdorj, Dash Sampilon, Erdin Batkhan,